Welcome once again, and I'm pleased to be able to share with you that at this point we have actually reached the midpoint of our analysis. Mesorah Matrix has 10 major classic and which will prove to be historic works. 10 Commandments. 10 is a wonderful number to condense and to summarize the great contribution of Judaism and of Torah to the world. The subject under consideration today represents a discussion of the sixth book, the one on Havdalah, and it is, in fact, a discussion of a theme for which we ought to thank Torah, God, and Judaism for introducing a totally new concept to the intellectual world. Thomas Cahill wrote a book called The Gifts of the Jews, and he points out that it is the Jewish people who introduced a singularly new concept to the world's understanding. Until the Jewish people, there was no such thing as an understanding of time, or certainly the concept of sanctity of time. Time just happens. Time, in ancient thought, was cyclical. You live and you die, you live and you die, you live and you die. What do people do with time? Americans have an expression. I felt I had to kill some time. Kill time? No. Time kills you unless you prevent suicide and unless you achieve something with time. Judaism and the Bible introduced the remarkable idea not of killing time, but of sanctifying time. The very first mitzvah given to the Jewish people appears in the book of Exodus, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim, where God told Moses to tell the Jewish people that from now on, as they are going to become free, they are to be in control of time. They are to determine time based on witnesses coming and saying, a new moon has appeared, let us sanctify it. Because in order to be free men, the first thing they had to recognize was that they would now be in control of their own time. To control time is to control your destiny. To control time is to understand the meaning of your life. Now, this concept was rooted in creation and the story of creation. This concept is the key to understanding the theme of book number 6 in the remarkable Mesorah Matrix series. Havdalah is a ritual performed on Saturday night. It requires a candle, spices, wine, and some words. Basically, it closes the Sabbath. It separates the Sabbath from the days of the week, and that's why it's called Havdalah, which means separation. But it is remarkable that implicit in Havdalah is an idea that can change the world. What does Havdalah really teach us? Havdalah, for some, simply represents the end of Shabbat. Shabbat is the day of holiness, and we begin Shabbat with the Kiddush. Kiddush recited on a cup of wine. Kiddush, which means sanctity. It is our way of saying this day is different, this day is holy, this is God's day. This is the day dedicated to the soul, not to the body. But when people assume that Havdalah is simply closing the Sabbath, pull the curtain down, show is over, they fail to grasp the far more significant meaning of this ritual and the concept implicit in it. Just as Kiddush over a cup of wine introduced Shabbat and said, this day is going to be holy at the end of Shabbat. It is not so much that we close Shabbat as if to say goodbye to sanctity. But in a brilliant exposition, there are commentators who teach us that Havdalah is Kiddush as well, Kiddush for the forthcoming days of the week. It is sanctifying the days to come. It is expressing the idea that Shabbat, which has just concluded, is meant to leave us with certain ideas that are now to be carried over into the days which follow. And our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to understand at present the difference between Chol and Kodesh, the weekdays and the holy day of Sabbath, in order to accept and comprehend the mission that we now have after having lived through a Sabbath. Let me explain. Havdalah means to differentiate. In Hebrew, wisdom has two words. One is chachma, the other is bina. For those who are Kabbalistically inclined, they represent two sirot, two ways in which God created the world. Chachma is wisdom and bina is understanding. What's the difference between them? Chachma is accumulating knowledge. Bina, from the root bain, between, is to comprehend the difference between this and that, to gather the fine points of distinction in order to apply chachma. With wisdom, combined with understanding, you can change the world. Kabbalah puts it this way. Chachma is the father and Bina is the mother. And what in the world does that mean? It is profound beyond words. The father carries the sperm, which has the DNA, which contains the potential for future development. The mother in the womb gestates it. The mother takes the sperm and her egg and allows it to become what it could become. And here is where we suddenly grasp that the remarkable philosophic contribution of David Birnbaum to the world, the contribution that has given us the entire new field of potential and potentialist theory, has its biblical basis in the idea that chachma, wisdom, accumulated wisdom, is potential, and bina, taking that and differentiating between this and that so that we can actualize it, is fulfillment. Potential leads to fulfillment. And what did God do when he created the world on day one? That was Sunday. Saturday night, to be more precise. God created light, and then Vayavdel, God separated, God made Havdalah between day and night, and he called one Yom, and he called the other Laila. He called one Or and the other Choshech, light and darkness. He differentiated and taught us the concept of differentiation so that we grasp what are the days of the week. We call them Chol. I've heard people say that there's the sacred and the profane. Kodesh and Chol. Chol is not profane. Chol is the same word as chul, as a hole, an empty space. Chalal. A corpse is a cholol. Cholol is a corpse because he is empty of his neshama. He is devoid of sanctity. What is the mission for the days of the week which are called Chol? If you've just lived through a Shabbat, then you are to recognize that from the message of Shabbat, you are now introducing Kiddusha, holiness, into the Chol, the void, the emptiness of the week. That is your mission, to turn the potential of weekday into the fullness and completeness and ultimate vision of the Shabbat. Do you know that in Judaism, we do not call the days of the week by name, such as Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? We say Hayom Yom, today is Yom Rishon LeShabbat, the first day to the Sabbath. Monday is Yom Sheni LeShabbat, the second day to the Sabbath. Every day assumes meaning only in its being defined as a step closer to the goal, which is the goal of our lives, which is the purpose of our living, which is the message implicit in the days that still remain devoid of Kiddusha, holiness, to be filled with purposefulness. At the end of Shabbat, we make Havdalah and mention 4 distinctions that are required for us to comprehend. Hamnavdil ben Kodesh l'chol, God separates between the holy and the not holy, or as I would say, between the not yet holy. Ben or l'choshech, between light and darkness. Ben Yisrael lo'amim, between the Jews and the nations. Ben Yom ha'shvi l'shesh yamei ha'masa, between the 7th day and the 6 days of work and of activity. It is fascinating when we stop and think about it, that this separation, unlike what some people might think, represents a kind of division which says, well, this is good and this is bad. This is wonderful and this is to be discarded. The division that we speak of in terms of Havdalah is one that seeks to incorporate rather than to discard, is one that says this is holy and this is not yet holy, and seeks, needs, aspires to have its potential become fulfilled with actualization. When we say in the Havdalah, who separates Ben Yisrael Lo'amim, between Jews and the nations, this is a crucial point to point out. Most people believe that it's a very chauvinistic kind of statement. It's egotistical, between Jews and the nations. God separates us from them. A we and a them seems to imply superiority. And that's not at all what it is meant. Because when God gave the Torah, he came to the Jewish people and said, I have a deal for you. And the deal was, V'atem, and you, Tieli, should be for me, Mamlechet Kohanim v'goy Kodosh, a kingdom of Kohanim, of priests, and a holy nation. Now the commentators ask, you know that amongst the Jewish people, there are Kohanim, priests, there are Leviim, Levites, and there are Yisraelim, the rest of the Jews. I am not a Kohen. I am an Israelite. I do not have that distinction of being a Kohen. And yet God says to the Jewish people, and you collectively shall be to me a kingdom of Kohanim. Ask the commentators, not all Jews are Kohanim. Then how can that be part of the deal? And the answer is, what God is telling us is that what Kohanim, the spiritual leaders amongst the Jewish people, are to the rest of the people, the Jewish people are to be to the rest of the world. We are to be an or lagoyim, a light to the nations, that is to say, light is something that removes darkness. And our goal is, our mission is, our function is to remove darkness from the world, spiritual darkness, intellectual darkness, a darkness of a lack of understanding. And when we are mavdil, separate ben Yisrael lo amim, what are we saying? What the Jews already have needs to be viewed as the potential gift to be given to the rest of humankind. It is a separation that seeks not to debase by definition. It seeks not to put down others, but rather says, this is better than that, and therefore let us bring this up to that. That is the messianic vision. That is the goal of Judaism, which is to turn history into destiny, and the way in which I would put that in the classic terms of the philosophy of David Birnbaum, who is the editor-in-chief of this series and inspires this series, is, in fact, the definition of our mission to the world, to bring our potential into actualization is the messianic vision, which is why the sages teach us that the world to come is a Sabbath, and history as we now are experiencing it are the days of the week. The Sabbath and the concept of the Sabbath implies an ultimate vision, implies history turning into destiny, teaches us that there is a goal, and that is why we make Havdalah. And Havdalah is the ability to recognize that this is not yet that. It is aspirational, and therefore we use a candle in order to fulfill the ritual of Havdalah, and that in and of itself is profound and beautiful and perfectly captures the idea which I've been exploring with you. Fire and the ability to use fire is what differentiates, again, Havdalah, differentiates civilized man from the primates which came before, who are not yet Adam. The ability to control fire allows us to cook, to warm ourselves, allows us to do all those things that represent civilized human beings. It is the major step in the history of humankind. And in Greek mythology, how did that step occur? Prometheus stole the secret of making fire from the gods. That means in Greek mythology, it was a concept that the gods sought to conceal from humankind. Judaism, the Torah, tells us something different. On the first Saturday night of history, God showed Adam how to make fire in order to become creative. And what was the concept? God said, I have created the world. 7 days was my contribution. Now I'm going to teach you how to make fire, and through your knowledge, this will be the first step in your learning to be creative, and as the rabbis of the Talmud put it, become a co-partner in creation with me. Continue to create. You carry on. You do what I just taught you in every way, in every form. All of science, all of progress is blessed by God. Brit Milah, circumcision, a sign of the covenant, is on the 8th day in order to indicate that in 7 days God created the world. And now, Havdalah, your understanding of Havdalah, Bina, to grasp the differences between things so that you can carry on and carry forward in creating, is what will humanize you, will make the world a better world. And therefore, I am giving you this gift, and we take a candle at the close of Shabbat and say, we will now take this gift and become co-creators in order to turn this into a better world. There's a remarkable custom associated with Havdalah. We'll look at the candle, we see the light, and then we use that light to look at our fingernails. And the best interpretation of that custom I have ever seen is this. We grow, but we grow very slowly. We are different from year to year. Someone who hasn't seen us for 50 years will say, my God, I can hardly recognize you. In 10 years, perhaps will say that as well. You've changed so much. But the changes occur gradually. There's only one thing that we can look at which makes us aware that we grow, because we can see growth quite rapidly. Our nails grow quickly. From week to week, we are to look at our nails and to ask ourselves, have I grown in this past week? Am I a little bit better than I was last week? Did I do anything to deserve my stay on earth? Did I take from the sanctity of the Sabbath and introduce it into the weekday world? Here's another last insight from Kabbalah. The world as we know it, the world counting from the creation of Adam and Eve, the world which, according to the Hebrew calendar, is 5,777, we are told will only last until the Hebrew year 6,000. Now, why is that? 6 days of creation, 6,000 years of history, and then comes the final Sabbath. That is the goal, and the final Sabbath is fulfillment, ultimate fulfillment of potential. There we have the philosophy of potentialism, of which David Birnbaum is the architect, expressed magnificently from week to week as we express the hope, the ideal that the holiness of the Sabbath, representing our ultimate potential, become actualized during the days of the forthcoming week.